Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be reacting to Jubilee, another Jubilee video. They've been having some interesting videos recently, and this one's Ben Shapiro versus 25 Kamala Harris voters. So let's dive right into it. And I want to preface this. I used to really respect and like Ben Shapiro, and I still respect him, but it's unfortunate that, in my opinion, at the very least, that he, when it comes down to talking Republican politics in particular, he falls into the same Republican, brain rot that all these other Republicans fall into. And I feel like if you had a more normal conversation, like the one he had with Destiny, you can actually have a real conversation. But just like how Republicans say, oh man, Democrats, all the elite, blah, 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 blah. I mean, the same thing can be said about the Republicans. They all fall in line and they all serve their masters. So let's see how this conversation goes. I'm gonna speed it up because.
How's it going, dude?
Morning. Josh.
Where do I get one of those hats?
Oh, my boy made it for me.
Nice.
So
I don't think Shapiro's a bad person.
First of all,
He's
we're
just-
standing on stolen indigenous Tongva land.
Oh my gosh. All right. This should be a layup for Shapiro right off the rip.
Right? This is.
Are you moving anytime
indigenous
soon?
land? No, but
Why?
the fact of the matter is I'm born and raised California. We're talking
Yeah, but
about
it's stolen land, so why don't you
diversity,
do that?
equity, and vision. We should.
So why don't
We
you?
absolutely
You
should.
could do it today, right now.
Great.
So
We
do it.
should, but that's not my point here. The point is,
Lefties, man. Lefties can be wild, bro. Same with righties. They both can be wild. Okay. So when it comes down to something that I think is interesting, or basically, let me answer this question. Kamala Harris's attempt to put DEI at the center of her policies is destructive. I don't see her putting DEI at the center of her policies. I don't really see that. Also, I don't know why these guys hate DEI so much, man.
you're saying that diversity, equity, inclusion is destructive.
Yes.
Right. So when we look at this country that is built off the backs of slavery
Black people are getting
and
jobs. That's the problem.
white supremacy, taking the lead, building the roots and foundations of everything that you know and believe today, it's ironic to see a Black and Indian woman who's rising up to the occasion against society, pushing them down. And this isn't just the fact that they're Black and Indian and a woman, it's the fact that
Can you give me an example of how society pushed Kamala Harris down, please?
the demographic of people is what I'm talking about.
Well, yeah, but you suggested that Kamala Harris is being pushed down by society.
I'm not suggesting that, no.
I mean, that's
So
Okay,
my
boss,
point is saying that.
I'm sorry, you've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
good to meet you. Whoa, whoa. Man.
Hey, Ben.
Hey, how's it going?
Nice to meet you. So my opening question to you would be, why is that a destructive thing? Why is that a bad thing when, for a long time in this country, I feel personally that white men have had an advantage over some communities that have been discriminated against. So why would you say that that is a destructive thing and not, maybe making up for lost time?
Sure. So let me explain what I mean by diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the basic theory of diversity, equity, and inclusion is spelled out by people like Richard Delgado, who's sort of one of the founders of, for example, critical race theory, is that essentially disparities equal discrimination. That if you see any disparity between one group in the United States and another group in the United States, that is the result of some exterior discrimination. It is not the result of individuals within that group acting differently. It's not the result of cultural differences. It's not the result of aggregated differences within individuals within that group. And that to me is a failure of logic. It also
Let me hear what he said again.
disparities equal discrimination. That if you see any
Maybe making up for lost time.
Sure. So let me explain what I mean by diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the basic theory of diversity, equity, and inclusion is spelled out by people like Richard Delgado, who's sort of one of the founders of, for example, critical race theory, is that essentially disparities equal discrimination. That if you see any disparity between one group in the United States and another group in the United States, that is the result of some exterior discrimination. It is not the result of individuals within that group acting differently. It's not the result of cultural differences.
Is this the way it's practiced in reality? DEI? I'm gonna let him continue. Let's see where it goes.
It's not the result of aggregated differences within individuals within that group. And that to me is a failure of logic. It also is destructive in that it separates group from group, particularly in the United States, on the basis of race, which is not the best way of actually bringing Americans together or forming policy that is the best for all Americans.
Do you think there's room for nuance, perhaps, though? Like, yeah, maybe not everybody, but there certainly has been a large sect of people that has had it harder because of the color of their skin or their sexuality or their gender identity. Could you acknowledge that maybe there's, a middle ground there where it's not all, but there is some people who certainly have had a disadvantage?
I will say that history has consequences, obviously, and that if you are talking about historic marginalization of particular groups, that has consequences. The problem is that when you design policy in order to rectify for cosmic injustices or historic injustices, you actually have to try and measure out whether underperformance, say, economically, is due to those historic injustices. If so, how much? What is the corrective policy that is actually aimed at achieving best opportunity for all? The diversity, equity, inclusion policies that are directed at separating race from race and then benefiting one race, for example, at the expense of another, ignore the fact that there are individuals within those groups, that history does not fall on everybody equivalently, that frankly, genetics and intelligence don't necessarily fall on an individual level, right? You and I, we don't look the same. We might have different heights. We might have different qualities. That is just the way that God or nature has bestowed skill sets on everybody. What exactly is the government supposed to correct for? And if you took this entire group and you separate it in half, just draw a line anywhere. It's a circle, right?
I just feel like his interpretation of what DEI is supposed to provide in the current society is a little bit misguided, and it's much more black-pilled than I think it should be at the very least. I mean, Republicans think everything Democrats do is the worst thing ever, so not too surprised. But I mean, from my understanding, and I even had a conversation on the podcast with it, for the most part, the idea is equal opportunity, right? Making sure that these people have the opportunity to succeed, especially people who are not afforded that ability because of historical indifferences, like you mentioned before, right? So we're trying to put things into place to allow them to get that extra leg up, because a lot of people, especially people who are not even just black, just low income in general, those people are in a situation where it's going to be tough for them to reach a status of that is equitable to their ability, because they are started from such a lower or further back threshold. Their beginning was just worse. Their beginning was just less. They had less networking opportunities. They had less resources. So it's trying to bring those people who have the ability in a closer space to showcase their ability and be a product of society. So I don't know why Shapiro is so black-pilled with, oh yeah, we just want the basically they just think that DEI is just having anybody get opportunities and they don't deserve it. That's literally all Republicans think.
Anywhere you draw a line, you're going to get disparities between the two groups on either side of the line, without regard to race, without regard to sex, and without regard to, for example, sexual orientation.
But does that mean that hasn't played an effect in that story at all?
I'm not going to. No, you'd be a fool to claim that, that again, past injustices have no effect on what's happened today. Thanks so much. Watching guys gear up to run is really entertaining. That was so nice, everybody. Thank you.
So you believe that certain economic disparities between racial groups are caused as a result of cultural differences?
Sure.
And so what is the backing on this? What would you say contributes to your belief in that?
Okay, so not all cultures, for example, value studying in school the same. You can check this by the amount of hours that the kids of particular culture study. So, for example, Korean Americans can study a lot more than, for example, Latino Americans in terms of the number of hours that kids study. It would be hard to suggest what to attribute that to other than sort of parental guidance and what exactly the priorities are of the parents. This is true, by the way, between white people. Okay, so when I talk about disparities between groups, you can talk about white Appalachia, and there are very different values with regard to studying than there are for, say, upper class white Americans who are living in Brooklyn. Right? That's not the exact same thing. So cultural differences are not just racial differences. I think that anybody who attempts to sort of clumsily map that on and pretend that that's all the same, that's obviously not true. But cultural differences do explain an enormous amount of group disparities across incomes. To take a perfect example, if you look at single motherhood rates, they're not equivalent across groups. So they're going to have massive differences with regard to outcomes for children. So if you're talking about cultural differences, again, cultural is just a rough way of saying how people act within a group on a large scale. And that is going to amount to some generalization, but that generalization is going to tend to, shall we say, concur. It's going to.
That generalization's meaningless when we're talking about individual opportunity, right? I mean, that's the biggest thing behind DEI is the people who, let's say, even if you're right, the people who are able to go beyond the cultural stigma that is taking place in their community and want the opportunity to succeed, but because of this stigma that you even put into place, that generalization and just the reality of their circumstance, they just don't have the resources and the opportunity to do that. That's what DEI is for, to provide them that opportunity. So I mean, like, I don't know. I just feel like Shapiro doesn't want to. Nah, I'm not gonna make it generalization.
Correlate very highly with
I don't know
outcome.
why there's
But
such a
culture
negative opinion on DEI. I
is
don't know
acclimated
why.
over time. It becomes a thing over time. And so do you not think that these historical disadvantages that certain ethnic groups have been through over time has created this culture where in which they're unable to put themselves ahead? You do say that Asian Americans are more likely to
Studious, shall we say.
study, yes, but we have to take into account that after the Chinese Exclusion Act, Asian Americans were given a certain type of reparations which allowed them into the country. And in
What
order
were
for
the
them,
reparations?
they were given visas, which allowed them to come into the, yes, they
Let's not start giving black people reparations. That's not what I'm here for, bro. Congress repealed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1943, establishing an immigration quota for China. Today, China remains the top country of origin for international students in the U.S. What does this fact check have to do with what she said? What?
and
So,
in
What
order
were
for
the
them,
reparations?
they were given visas, which allowed them to come into the, yes, they were given
I-
easier
I understand,
processes
but
into visas,
visas
yes,
are
which
not
allowed them
reparations.
into, no, it's a form of reparations, which they were once excluded from coming in. And so giving them an easier opportunity to attain these visas allowed them into the US. And mainly the individuals who were able to attain those were people with higher educations, which is why it may seem that Asian Americans
I don't
within the
really get her
country
point
who come
is-
in
she's
typically
a
with
little
higher
nervous,
incomes as well as
so
higher
I'm not
educational
gonna
backgrounds,
be
it may come
too
off as that they are more studious than Latino
rude.
Americans. But what we have to take into account is that Latin America and Hispanic people have faced a lot of
They're-
tremendous setback due to historical
So,
atrocities. It's not their culture per se. What you see within
Is there any individual agency in here, or is it all historic circumstances?
But that, I'm gonna let it continue.
everything is based off of history. Everything acclimates. Everything is an accumulation of history.
So to take the single motherhood example, for
the
example,
way
so that's fine anyway.
She'll get more comfortable.
Whoa. Hey, how's it going? How are you?
Dean wanted to
Good
get
meet
in
you.
there, man.
So your
Dean wanted to
basis
get
is
in
saying
there.
that culturally people don't have the same
That man
advantages,
Dean is getting pretty clouded. Respect, man. Respect.
right?
I'm saying that not every culture sort of initiates the same action within groups.
So in part, you're saying that you're part of each culture. You know what goes on in each culture to say these things.
No, I'm saying that I can analyze the activities of a particular group with reference to their actual behavior.
So if you go into my culture, we're told that we can achieve
Rude.
anything through hard work. We have to work 10 times harder. But you're not part of our culture, so you're explaining something that doesn't have to do with you. But in turn, you're saying that that culture, unfortunately, does not value the same thing that the next culture does.
So revealed preference tends to be a better way of doing social science than subjective perception. So revealed preference is how people act in the world. So for example, if you have one group of people who say, we really, really value our kids studying, and then their kids don't study at all, that would be a revealed preference.
Okay.
Everybody has
So
has
then
a
when you
reason
have
to say their
people
kids study.
who say in corporate America, you have people who value nepotism versus actual studying hard.
I mean, you can really just go back to his point regarding individual capacity again. Because in reality, like you said, there are situations that take place. There are black hardworking families. There's Latino hardworking families. We can bring up tons of examples that have a culture. It doesn't, just because in terms of culture, it's even hard to say studying behavior is necessarily part of a culture. More so, I'm gonna go too much on a tangent. Let me just let it continue. But I just have an issue.
What is
with,
that called
like,
then?
Okay, so the idea
points
that
he's
people
making.
generally value nepotism over studying hard, I'd like to see the evidence of that, given the fact the vast majority of wealth in this country is not created through nepotism or through inherited wealth.
But Donald Trump was given nepotism, was he not?
I mean, he's one example among a bajillion people who are very, very wealthy in this country. I'm very wealthy now. I certainly wasn't born very wealthy.
But then you can't speak on Donald Trump's
I mean,
experience,
that
can you
just
not?
happens to be the case. Okay, I mean, you can laugh at my particular history, but I grew up in an 1,100 square foot home in Burbank, California, with 4 siblings in 1 bedroom.
And Burbank, hold on.
Sorry, go ahead.
In Burbank,
I'm gonna move on. This conversation means nothing.
I was going, this one isn't.
Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seats.
Yeah, like a jackrabbit. Thank you, guys. I appreciate that.
She also got
Hi,
really
nice-
popular.
nice to meet
because
you.
of
Nice to meet you
Jubilee.
too.
Shout out Jubilee,
So,
man.
I kind of want to shift the conversation about DEI a little bit away from culture because I don't know if that's necessarily like a helpful conversation to have. And I really want to talk more about
I agree.
representation. So,
Okay.
1 in 5 Americans currently is Hispanic. This country, like it or not, is not a homogenous country. We are a very diverse country. Do you not think that our legislators should be representative of the overall population?
I don't see a way that you can have a quote unquote representative legislature with 435 members of Congress in a country of 340 million people, because you can divvy that up however you want. It's not by race, you can do it by sex, you can do it by gender, you can do it by sexual orientation. How exactly do you decide what is quote unquote the representative group? And also, I don't believe that individuals ought to be represented based on group identity. So, for example, I'm Jewish. I don't think Jews are actually overrepresented in Congress.
I don't agree with that.
I don't think that we ought to decide exactly how many people in Congress are Jewish based on the Jewish population of the country. I think that's actually a pretty silly way to do representation.
Well, we don't have to do
What?
it systematically, but fundamentally, there is an issue with the fact that we are not fully represented. Like, the entire population is not represented.
I mean,
We have
that's not
never
true.
had a black female president. I still have to pay taxes.
We've never had a
the whole
Jewish president.
concept
Who
is
cares?
no taxation without, but we have had a white male president. We've had like
Well,
45 of them.
whether Jews count as white or not has been sort of an object of debate for
You
quite
do.
a while.
I'm not gonna lie.
We do. Okay.
You do.
So, I mean, it depends according to whom, and that's a pretty recent development. Okay, so
Basically, everyone. It's a religion.
Judaism
Do
is
you
also
not
ethnicity.
agree that you are a white man?
I mean, I think that it depends on the context in which we're discussing it.
What is
So
Meaning
where
that-
are you, Ben? Are you not a white guy?
I mean, I'm a man of Jewish ethnicity, which is sometimes grouped with
So
white,
what are we
sometimes not. I
doing?
mean, that's the more
What are we
accurate way to put
doing?
it. But when
what
we're
else would
talking
you be
about
grouped with?
with Jews, who are which is an
But it's-
ethnicity, which is an ethnicity. I mean,
So
yeah.
you're not white at all.
I mean, again, it depends who's doing the grouping and how. I've seen Jews grouped with white and Jews grouped with not white. Are we just pretending that doesn't exist? That's a reality. However, as far as your generalized point, which is that we are supposed to identify people by group identity, that if we don't have a black female president, somehow black females have not been represented. So Barack Obama was in no way representative of black females because he's not a female.
No,
he's
he
black.
was. He was representative,
So
but
he was
that's
half
the point.
representative. How do you do the math on this, and why?
You shouldn't do the math on it completely statistically, but the fact
You shouldn't
is
do the math on it
there's
at all. You should
clearly
treat people as individuals.
underrepresented.
You should treat people as individuals.
Well, if you don't even want Kamala
But
Harris
that's
to
not how
attempt to create
representative
DEI
democracy
initiatives in
works. How
office,
are you
then there
gonna
isn't
treat
even going to be a
everybody as
conversation
individuals?
about it.
I mean, I don't think there ought to be a conversation about why we ought to be represented by race or by sex. I think that we are each individual people with individual ideas, and if that person represents my
Don't
idea,
say that, but this irritates me because all you Republicans say the same fucking thing. Oh my goodness, that's annoying. Because I feel like Ben Shapiro's like, there's this version of Ben Shapiro, which, okay, I hear you, logic, a little bit more of a free thinker. Then there's Republican Ben Shapiro that contradicts everything that he's saying right now, and it's kind of annoying. So it's like,
ideas, I don't care what sex, race, or sexual orientation they are.
I mean, to an extent, yes,
No,
but there
entirely.
is an issue with the lack of empathy in office. We need to be able to empathize and legislate for the people that are living in this country.
I was not
Do you
aware,
not believe that?
I was not aware that empathy is relegated to particular race solidarity.
No, but I mean, it's easier to be empathetic towards people whose experiences you can fundamentally understand based on your identity. Like, do you not believe that people have an inherent bias
So first of all, I'm
based
not
on
sure, I
identity?
mean, we can start with empathy itself. I'm not sure that empathy is always the best basis for actual public policy, because when you have group solidarity and empathy based on group solidarity, you're going to attempt to actually benefit the group with whom you have solidarity. So that actually cuts against
But
generalized
that's like a
public
fundamental
policy.
thing that just exists, which is why we need representation in government. Okay, cute. Thank you.
man, she got so much shots.
Well, he got it this time.
got
All
it,
right,
we got it.
nice. Good to see you. How are you doing?
Yo,
Doing all right. How are
dude.
you, Ben?
You know, it's been a day.
Yes, it's a little bit of like an interesting setting being surrounded by 20 people that disagree with you.
I mean, the truth is I grew up in LA and then I went to law school in Cambridge. So,
So
I'm
you
a
have a
little
lot
used to
more
it.
than
Yeah, I've been here before.
Anyways, let's talk about DEI. Do you think that Trump should have won 2016?
Uh,
I'll wrap it in. It's conceptually relevant. I'll demonstrate the relevance.
Okay, sounds good. By what measure? Do I think he did win, or do I think he should have won?
Do you think he should have won?
I mean, yes, I'm happy that he won. If the question is, am I happy that he won? I'm happy that he won.
Okay. Well, I'd say that Trump won 2016 because
By
of
the way, I did not vote for either candidate in 2016. That's a decision made in retrospect.
Awesome. So I think that Trump won 2016 because of a modality of DEI. Essentially, what I'd say is the Electoral College, right, strives for inclusion of smaller states with lower populations by overrepresenting them in the overall vote. Like, you could correct me if I'm wrong, or the SAN fact checkers can. I'm pretty sure that over the last 25 to 30 years, Republicans have won the presidency given the Electoral College, not given the overall popular vote. So if you're against
The last time a Republican candidate won the popular vote was 2004. Okay.
DEI, if you don't want inclusion on the basis of race, inclusion on the basis of gender, or even what you're saying earlier, we could even say inclusion on the basis of class. Why do you want inclusion on the basis of population, rural areas, states,
We should actually use a better
in the
example. Why don't you just
Electoral
ask if I
College?
believe in the U.S. Senate? Right?
The
is a
U.S.
better
Senate, this would
example.
also apply to the U.S. Senate.
Right, okay, so let's use the U.S. Senate, because the U.S. Senate is actually even more unrepresentative of the general population than the Electoral College, which is at least
Is this really proving the efficacy of DEI, or just proving a potential inconsistency in terms of representation? I mean, Shapiro did sound like he doesn't believe in representation at all. So let's see where this line
least
of
a rough
logic goes.
approximation.
It'd just be funnier to hear you say that you shouldn't have voted for Trump in 2016. But we could talk about
I mean,
the Senate
that's a different subject, but
Yeah.
I'm very happy that he won, even though I didn't vote for him. And we can talk about Trump later.
Yeah.
We've already done a bit. Well, I'm sure we'll do more. As far as the idea that every elected body. It has to be elected based on population as opposed to based on the area of geographic distribution or the states that actually pre-existed the federal government. Okay, the way that the Constitution of the United States was created was as a contract between sovereign states, which is one of the reasons why, for example, you have a United States Senate as opposed to just a House of Representatives. So is that a form of DEI? That seems like a stretch to me. The kind of DEI that I'm talking about specifically would be separating human beings based on inherent characteristics, like, for example, race, as opposed to suggesting that the United States Senate, which is obviously unrepresentative of the general population.
Well, seemingly my point is
that's
just
a check and balance, right?
Well, seemingly my point is that this is another modality of DEI. I've like no problem with you explaining to me, right, why the Senate or the Electoral College would be given the U.S. Constitution and like some contractual agreement that they had between the sovereign states. That's fine. But what I'd say is that your claim here would just imply that the Constitution upholds DEI within our electoral processes.
If your claim is
so, do you think that the Constitution upholds DEI in the sense of including smaller states with less representative populations?
That is a true stretch of the meaning of DEI. But I get your point. I mean, if the idea is that the only thing that is not pure DEI in a democratic context would be sort of popularly represented votes, then I think you can make the case that basically we should get rid of every representative institution. We should go to a pure democracy.
Well, I'm not making a case for what we should replace it with. I'm making a case that it would uphold DEI. We could talk about, right, what other systems should function in the case of the Electoral College or in the case of the Senate, but that's a completely different conversation than are these systems upholding DEI.
So again, I think that you're definitionally stretching DEI. If DEI is the basic idea that all disparities equal discrimination and must be rectified by government interventionism, which is sort of the definition, then stretching that to mean the Electoral College seems like you're going pretty far afield to defend a very broad concept as specifically badly applied.
Wait, 1 second. I don't think that we need to say that DEI is equivalent to disparities equal discrimination. We could just see that DEI is like a qualm for disparities in general, right? And what we apply here in this certain modality when we're talking about the Electoral College, when we're talking about the Senate, is we're trying to qualm the disparities of the lack of population in rural areas. We're trying to qualm the disparities of smaller states compared to larger states. And seemingly,
I feel like the best way to go about this is to distinguish what DEI is used in practice instead of basically conceding this I guess definition or this interpretation of DEI from what Ben Shapiro said.
You haven't really given me a response to this apart from calling it a stretch, but I do appreciate you for.
No, I mean, it seems to me like the argument that you're making is that in order for there to be calm and sort of conciliation inside the United States, particular racial groups have to be given particular benefits. Okay, because that was the argument with regard to the states in the United States, right? When the Constitution was formed, the way that you came to an actual agreement in the Constitutional Convention is states were not going to sign on unless they got particular guarantees of the interests of those particular states, right? So if you're claiming that that's DEI, then the response that I would have is right, because that's how you have to come to an agreement. So if you're going to make the parallel argument with regard to DEI in, for example, the racial context, you then have to make the case that the only way that you can have conciliation in the United States is for particular racial groups to be given specific racial benefits, and otherwise the country is going to split apart, which is an argument with which I generally disagree, even if I agreed with the way the Constitution was formed.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't see like your parallel here, right? I think that DEI could exist in multiple modalities. My argument in a nutshell is nothing more than the fact that we see disparities existing in rural areas compared to metropolitan areas. We see disparities existing in the size of a state and its overall population, and you're qualming these, and you're losing the
DEI response to that would not be
like through like an over-representation.
And the DEI
I understand that your argument is, but my single-handed point here is that you would say, in some sense, that this is a reconciliation to introduce more, inclusion in the sense of a state-to-state in there.
I mean, I feel like the question to ask Shapiro is that when it comes down to people who since he admitted that historical situations have played a factor into why there's this disparity, if you recognize that as a truth and you know that these people, that there are individuals, the individual capacity that is referred to, if you recognize that these individuals have a situation where they're not able to achieve their capability, their intelligence, or their just general ability based off a certain field, wouldn't you think that giving them benefits to put them on a same level playing field as a rich X, Y, and Z is fair? Wouldn't you say that's fair? Or would you say, screw them, figure it out? That's the question I would ask Shapiro.
In their population. I mean, so if you make the concession that this is DEI, would you say in the same sense that we shouldn't have
I don't make
other
the concession
DEI
that falls within the definition of DEI that I've used. And if your claim is that I'm now in favor of, for example, subsidies to rural areas at the expense of urban areas, I'm not actually.
So do you think that DEI would only apply in the context of race?
No, it could apply in the context of class. It could apply.
Okay, if it could apply in the context of race, class, and identity, why can't it apply in the context of a state's population and their representation in our government?
I mean, if they were to receive special bennies at the expense of other members of the population,
they are. Yes, like Alabama or Arkansas are literally receiving special benefits insofar as a greater level of representation in our.
I feel like this is a non-conversation because that's not even how DEI is really used when it comes to corporations, because this is just a term and program that is used in terms of businesses and corporations.
And electoral
No,
processes compared to people in California. I mean, for instance, that's my 1 second. That's my buddy Parker over there. He lives in California, right? And
I'm fully aware
I
how the
live in
Electoral College and the
Colorado.
Senate work, dude.
So I literally have more representation person for person in the sense of Parker's vote compared to my vote, because individualistically speaking, I'm from a state that has more representation, and the same thing could be said for multiple other states across America, especially in the Senate. There's
having a
two
tough time
senators that
getting
represent me and everyone else in Colorado, and there's
dude,
two
I understand
senators
how
that
this
represent
works.
him and
My question
millions
is,
more people.
how are you
in
getting from point
California.
A, which is that California has 2 senators and Colorado has 2 senators, to point B, which is that we should have incredible racial carve-outs on the basis of group identity at the behest of the federal government? That is a very, very large stretch. And to get from point A to point B on the basis of the constitutional structure seems like you're going pretty far afield. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but the rubber band only goes so far.
That's the end of this claim.
That's right.
I appreciate you, man. Hopefully we can talk more.
My next claim is that Kamala Harris's extreme pro-abortion stance is morally indefensible.
Extreme pro-abortion stance? What's so
Done.
extreme about Kamala
Hey,
Harris's
good to meet you.
abortion
Okay,
stance?
so I just want to clarify the claim because
sure.
okay, so the claim that I'm making about Kamala Harris, let's first say like what I believe her position to be. Okay, so she has not stated any abortion law that she would not veto. Right? So the partial birth abortion.
So, this is what pisses me off with Republicans. I'm gonna let you say what you gotta say, but if your claim is that Kamala Harris will be okay with third trimester abortions, Ben Shapiro, I'm not listening to any of this conversation because that's freaking unhinged, and Ben Shapiro, that's pathetic. So let's see.
Abortion Ban Act, for example, or late-term abortion bans, she would presumably veto that as president of the United States. That's the position that I'm taking in this particular prompt. Okay, so that is the position that I find morally indefensible. Okay, so again, I'm a very, very pro-life person, but I can see at least the sort of nuanced arguments. Veto that as president of the United States. That's the position that I'm taking in this particular
I feel like
prompt.
I've seen that
Okay,
girl
so that is the
before.
position that I find morally indefensible.
Is she
Okay,
like
so
that famous-
states, right? So her position to be. Okay, so the claim that I'm making about Kamala Harris, let's first say like what I believe her position to be. Okay, so she has not stated any abortion law that she would not veto. Right, so the partial birth abortion ban act, for example, or late-term abortion bans, she would presumably veto that as president of the United States. That's the position that I'm taking in this particular prompt. Okay, so that is the position that I find morally indefensible. Okay, so again, I'm a very, very pro-life person, but I can see at least the sort of nuanced arguments that some people on the left try to make about abortion, even if I disagree with those arguments. The argument that she's making, which is effectively abortion until birth should be in no way regulated, I find that to be morally indefensible.
My understanding right now.
Just anybody come up here and say Ben Shapiro, that's a ridiculous take, and you win. That's a ridiculous take to think that Kamala Harris won't veto abortion up until birth. It's ridiculous.
Right now is that a majority of Democrats would not support abortion through birth. My understanding is the more popular position. I don't think any state lets you go through birth. Maybe I'm off on that. Maybe there's a couple.
California and New York, actually.
Okay, understood. But yeah, I think the key claim is basically, I think most Democrats would want abortion within the first few weeks prior to the development of my personal moral starting point of life is that the mind is the seat of consciousness. The brain is is where your self is. If you replace your heart, you have a robo heart, you're chilling. If you replace your brain, you're a different person, you're dead. And I think that when that brain first starts to develop, that's sort of where I see the beginning of life and where the fetus gets their first moral consideration. Would you agree that abortion before that point is tolerable?
No, I don't agree with that. But again, quick question, just as far as defining the positions.
Yeah.
So would you agree that late-term abortion is indefensible?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, that's not my position. I would.
Okay,
not
so,
support that.
so you actually agree with me on the prompt. Okay, so now we get into the broader abortion
No,
conversation.
he
That's fine.
doesn't agree
No
with
worries.
you in
That's
the
totally
prompt.
So yes, no.
Do you feel like
He
a
doesn't
majority of
agree with you in
Democrats
the
support through like the moment before birth?
A majority of Democrats have not supported any abortion legislation on the federal level in my entire lifetime, nor do I suppose that they will. So if there were to be a consensus 15-week abortion ban, for example, which is about the status in Europe, I would assume that virtually all Democrats would vote against that 15-week abortion ban. So while I may agree with your more moderate position, or at least use that as a starting point, that is certainly not where the Democratic Party historically has been, nor is it where the Democratic Party is right
All right,
now.
awesome, understood. And just to understand where you begin your moral consideration for a fetus.
Where I consider
Yeah.
at conception, right? So I believe in life, that life begins at conception. You now
I
have
don't
a
care.
human. Once you acknowledge that they're dependent.
Okay,
You made it.
Someone
You're
just
good.
make it
You can
clear
relax.
that
Hi, how
this
are
is
you?
not
How are
true.
you?
Hello. Nice to meet you. Oh wow, you look better in person. Okay, so
That's very sweet of you.
Cringe.
I don't often get that, so thank
okay,
you.
it's fine. But yeah, how do you define abortion really quickly?
Abortion would be the forcible.
All right, I'm gonna skip this one. I already know this one's not gonna. Is anybody? I don't care about the pro-life women's body, all that stuff. Just someone just make it clear that Kamala Harris is not okay with what he said. Someone, just someone.
I think I got the judges over here.
All right.
Hey, nice to meet you, man.
Plus, I'll see you again later, dude. All right. Yeah.
Nice to meet
How's it
you.
going? Nice to
Hey,
meet you.
Cam. Hey, appreciate you being here and having an open discussion.
Yeah, you bet. It's fun.
Let's say that just hypothetically, right? Baby's born. Baby, mama can't feed the baby. She's not breastfeeding.
Okay, I'm skipping this too.
Look at that.
Hey, Ben.
Like a bro, my friend. All right.
How's it going?
Let's break open
So, first
beer or
question:
something.
can men get pregnant?
Men cannot get pregnant.
Okay, awesome. So,
Definitionally.
definitionally, okay. Do men experience SA, sexual assault?
Sure.
Okay, now I'm skipping this too. It's nobody can just make the obvious argument that it's unhinged for Kamala Harris to. All right. Apparently he's cooking a little bit, so I'll just let it go.
What about the existence of trans men?
What about the?
Okay, yeah, I'm moving on. Is anybody?
Even as a country is not what you're perpetuating. It's diversity. It's giving you tired, hungry, and poor. The Google phone you have in your pocket is because of all the diversity we've had.
Pause.
Pleasure to meet you.
Okay. There's a lot of tension in the room now. Let's stay cordial. Let's stay respectful, please. Please, please.
Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you. So let's say that I'm voted out by my friends here, and I stand up and immediately collapse onto the ground. Paramedics rush in, and through some magical means, they determine that the only person who can save my life is you. You can do that by giving me a transplant. Can you be forced to give me a transplant?
I cannot.
Why?
Because I do not have a parental relationship with you, and thus I do not owe you a duty of care in the same way that I would if, say, you were my son.
Can a
If my
parent be
son-
forced to give a kid a transplant?
Yes, a parent can be forced to give a kid an enormous
I
number.
hate every single argument. Just make it clear that it's unhinged to think that Kamala Harris supports abortion up until birth. Like, come on, this was not a hard one at all. Maybe this guy, all of them are trying to argue the morality of abortion. He's not going to change his mind.
That I actually do have a duty.
No, you do not. You do not have a duty to be.
A return to Roe v. Wade, but in the legislative level. That seems to be the majority opinion by the American people. They were not for the removal, right? Trump is not really for an abortion ban, right?
I mean,
In
he
his
himself said
personal
he is
level.
not.
Okay, yeah, but unfortunately, the way he governs, he puts those three folks in the Supreme Court. They do it. His vice presidential pick really wants to do it. He's claiming now that everybody wants it to the states. Nobody wanted it. No, that was not the demand. I think people are just kind of interested in protecting their freedoms. It's a bigger discussion about freedom. And I think Kamala Harris is going to be the presidential pick to protect the freedoms.
Okay, so again, I think that we have to define what we think Kamala Harris's position is. I think that it goes well beyond simply restoring Roe versus Wade, for example, which is an extremely flawed legal decision. A wide variety of legal scholars, ranging from right to left. Ruth Bader Ginsburg used to point out that
I
that was a
think
very flawed
we
legal
can't pretend that like this is like a bipartisan thing. Roe v. Wade was a problem. The bipartisan thing.
No,
was
you might like
having
the,
Roe
you
v.
might,
Wade.
you might like the result. You might like the result of Roe versus
I don't
Wade. The
have
actual
much
legal decision is a
listen,
bad legal decision.
I think that.
That's the end of this claim.
I'm glad you finally made it, though.
Hopefully, I can come back.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, all right, let's go to the next one.
Kamala Harris's border policies will turn America into an unsafe and bankrupt nation.
All right, let's talk about this.
I will let some of my
Oh, I
colleagues
like
here in
this guy.
circle really talk about why they appreciate Kamala Harris's right shift when it comes to border policy, trying to deter the amount of people that are coming through the southern border. That's not something I'm particularly passionate about. So I'm more inclined to talk about specifically why you, somebody who purports himself as someone who's uber capitalist, want to remove the labor pool from this country, which always increases to business and economic growth.
Right. So I'm not interested in removing the labor pool from the country as a general rule. However, I don't believe that it's an economic benefit to the United States to bring in a low skill, low education labor pool that is drawing significantly from public benefits. For example, there are very good data to show that there's huge reliance on, say, emergency rooms, educational facilities. Based on the Center for Immigration Studies, there's a net cost to low wage, low skill immigration coming
So
into the country.
you're in favor with emergency rooms just deterring people based on what they look like or what might be perceived as someone with a lack of citizenship?
No, I'm very much in favor of limiting the amount of illegal immigration to zero and then allowing a fair bit of legal immigration.
So you're
fewer
more
social
interested
benefits
in
available.
decreasing the pool of people and population in this country so there are less emergency room visits, or are you more in favor of actually documenting these people so we're able to track like exactly who is coming through?
Let me
Like
put this
I'm
simply,
kind of
it's
lacking
not,
what your
it's,
argument
it's,
is.
it's not about number. It's about the people who are coming in. I believe that everybody who comes into this country should come in through a legal mechanism, and that the United States ought to be able to select the people who are coming in who are the best, brightest, and most useful to the American population, because that is the prerogative of any nation.
So do you
I'm not mad at that. Do I feel the same way? bring in people the best price. It can't be subjective. The problem is, where's the line? And when you determine their value, every human being's value is different. Obviously true. Now, they don't have to be a rocket scientist. They can just be a skilled laborer, a landscaper. And I feel like that is value to the country. The question is, for me at the very least, for Republicans, where's the line for y'all? Do you guys have a line? Or is it like you have to be a genius? And if that is the case, I feel like that's messed up. That's just me. The world is not.
Do you
filled
think
with
that the way that we
geniuses,
do allow
obviously.
people in through our legalization process, especially with how much egregious obstacles people have to go through, might incentivize people to come through non-legal means?
I mean,
on average, it takes about 10 years for somebody to gain citizenship in this country. And if somebody is fleeing political persecution, I really find it interesting how conservatives always like to talk about the response to certain behaviors instead of what the root cause is. When oftentimes United States foreign policy is what creates the destabilization of countries, which is why people try to come to places where they can't get economic benefit. I mean, you're lacking. Your employee, Matt Walsh, was kind of schooled on this with Ryan Graham, where he talked about specifically Haitian policy, where the government of Haiti has been destabilized over and over again by Western imperial nations. So
He's cooking. Once a French colony gained independence 200 plus years ago, but had to pay reparations to France totaling $21 billion in today's dollars. For 122 years, up to 80% of Haiti's revenue went towards this debt. Following the assassination, Haiti's president in 1915 occupied the country under President Woodrow Wilson's orders until 1934. Go off, King. Go off.
So that those citizens are trying to flee something with political persecution.
Is it your contention that anytime there's a destabilized nation across the world, even if the United States had a hand in it, then we then have a moral obligation to take in every citizen of that country who wishes to flee?
No, I think that's a huge straw man. I'm not saying that every single person from a destabilized country needs to take refuge in the United States, but I think it's important to add that context so you can understand why people are coming here.
That's a case for a different foreign policy. That's not a case for an immigration policy.
The idea is people are coming in here to mooch off of our emergency rooms or mooch off of our social services, which is just not true at all.
I mean,
that's your big contention.
That is not my contention. My contention is I'm not claiming that the intent of people is to mooch off the system. The result of people is that they may be a net draw on benefits rather than a net contributor to the economy of the United States or to the culture of the United States, because I want people who are coming here who actually have some sort of belief in, say, American style.
I feel like everybody that comes in here believes in America. However, I really am not interested to hear about culture from Republicans, considering how many Republicans think that the government is corrupt and the election was stolen. Don't talk to me about culture until y'all fix your shit. That's what I'll say about that.
Style freedoms. I don't think everybody from all over the world has the same ideology.
So you're aligning with Nick Fuentes that like a lot of these people just don't have the exact same culture. These people don't have culture and they can't come here. I know that you're making that face. I know that he's an individual that you guys obviously disagree. He's somebody that's like increases calls for violence against people of certain communities. I'm not saying that you're identical,
Fuentes,
but I'm saying on this issue particular,
he literally makes videos trying to stab me. So
see this disdain in your face though. Like this is the type of disdain I have for the exact ideology that you guys are in agreement.
I don't understand why there's anything wrong with the idea that you ought to screen people for their viewpoint. Of course, people can assimilate, but you ought to select from a pool of people who are most likely to assimilate. That doesn't mean that everybody has. Do you think everybody on Earth has an equivalent ideology? Try and get into the country.
Not everybody in America have an equivalent ideology.
We shouldn't screen for ideology at all.
How would you screen for ideology? Like a basic test to show what people actually value when it comes to attributes?
Sure.
What would that test look like?
I mean, I think that would look very much like a citizenship test.
But this is not determining the ideologies of this person coming in. This is a determination.
I mean, they at least have to understand the basic.
People can actually have.
No, but people would actually have to understand the basic ideology.
How many U.S.-born citizens do you think could pass a citizenship test?
Nah, he cooked the shit out of Shapiro. I'm not gonna lie, he cooked the everlasting shit out of Shapiro.
So,
Kamala Harris supports the bipartisan border bill that was negotiated by conservative Senator James Langford and supported by Mitch McConnell. Do you not support that bill? And
I do not support that bill.
So what is your solution then?
I mean, my solution is that this actually ought not be done in a comprehensive fashion. So I have a general critique of the way that we deal with immigration in the country. Instead of trying to solve all problems at once, which is very likely to end in nothing, what we ought to first do is we ought to close the border.
And then the border is closed right now. Do you agree?
The border is certainly not closed right now.
What do you mean? There's a small trickle of people coming over. The numbers are similar to the end of the Trump administration, no?
Well, now because of executive order, they have been reduced significantly.
During the last 4 months of the Trump administration, there was on average 2,400 illegals. Right now, there's around 3,400.
Significantly, but
Do you
that
not
was
agree
done-
that the same
that
number
should
as
not
the end of the Trump administration?
right now,
Yes.
it is on a monthly basis, but that's after letting in 6.5 million illegal immigrants.
So do you think Trump was failing then at the end of his administration?
I think that Donald Trump did a better job than Joe Biden. He certainly did not do a perfect job on illegal immigration.
So Joe Biden is matching what Donald Trump is doing right now. So you applaud Joe Biden?
After letting in 6.5 to 11 million illegal immigrants,
Well,
I don't
those
think
are
you have to
border-
fill in that gap
those are
by
border-
doing it like 4 months of good border policy.
Those are border encounters. We don't know how many of those people were turned away. We don't know how many of those people are still in this country. But those people make up a significant portion of our labor force as well, including in states like yours, Florida, where they make up like 5%.
So your argument is that it's not happening and it's good that it is.
It's not happening? What do you mean?
That the illegal immigration pool is not very large, and also it's good that it is large.
I'm saying you guys make up numbers all the time. It's like
That
20,
argument is not
30
from me.
million.
No, that's from the Wall Street Journal. I'm not making up that number.
Well, Donald Trump said he wants to deport 20 million of these guys. What do you think of that?
I mean, I think that if we were going to look at deportations, we obviously have to tranche that out based on criminal record. We ought to tranche it out based on usefulness of the economy. I think we ought to look at each person individually and determine whether they ought to be deported or not.
Usefulness in
that
the
is probably going to
economy.
lead to a small.
That is the one thing that Shapiro keeps saying that is very, very concerning. Usefulness. That's basically I'll choose who I want to be Americans, and that is very concerning. I'm not gonna lie. That is extremely concerning when he keeps saying that. Because I don't know how he can gauge these things. When he went down the line of questioning on what determines someone's ideology in terms of American becoming an American, his answer was dog shit. He had no answer. He said, take a citizenship test. So this is like I'm catching, like obviously some parts are reasonable. We don't want criminals in the country, of course. That's reasonable. But then the usefulness to the economy, usefulness to the American ideology, those are red flags. Absolutely.
Small trickle of people being kicked out of here, so that's not going to accomplish your goal.
Well, I mean, who said that my goal was to mass deport 20 million people all
So
at
you
once?
want 20 million undocumented immigrants to stay in America?
No,
Is that what you're saying?
no, that is not what I'm saying. I fail to see how you got from I would like to go through one by one in the same way that we do IRS tax forms for literally
asking
every
too many
American who pays taxes in the United
questions.
States
Stay
and go
to-
through
stay
illegal
to
immigrants and
one
determine who
point.
ought to stay in the
One
country and who
point.
not ought to stay in the
So
country.
what army is going to go over these 20 million people, and with what resources? Where are you going to detain them? How are you
mean-
going to get them out of the country?
I mean, you'll detain them, you'll deport them, increasing the resources of ICE. The biggest problem with regard
ICE,
to yes,
similar to the bill that was rejected by you and.
well, I mean, you're neglecting the part of the bill that allowed a baseline of 5,000 illegal
I've
immigrants
heard
border
this.
encounters before the executive branch automatically kicked in border enforcement.
So
I've been down
don't
to the
you
border,
agree we
okay?
have to
Like
allow-
I went down to the border and let me tell you what I saw at the
Oh.
border and then we can go. Okay, so
Okay.
so
Saw it with your own eyes.
But not just saw with my.
All right, let me allow Shapiro to say this again.
So that is probably going to lead to a small trickle of people being kicked out of here. So that's not going to accomplish your goal.
Well, I mean, who said that my goal was to mass deport 20 million people all
So
at once?
you want 20 million undocumented immigrants to stay in America?
No,
Is that what you're saying?
no, that is not what I'm saying. I fail to see how you got from I would like to go through one by one in the
many
same way that we do
gotcha,
IRS
but
tax
yeah, that's
forms
what
for
I'm
literally every American who pays taxes in the United States and go through illegal immigrants and determine who ought to stay in the country and who not ought to stay in the
So
country.
what army is going to go over these 20 million people, and with what resources? Where are you going to detain them? How are you
mean-
going to get them out of the country?
I mean, you'll detain them and you'll deport them, increasing the resources of ICE. The biggest problem with
with
regard
ICE,
to yes,
similar to the bill that was rejected by you and.
well, I mean, you're neglecting the part of the bill that allowed a baseline of 5,000 illegal immigrants
heard this.
border encounters before the executive branch.
The Border Act would allow the Secretary of Homeland Security to block entry or remove illegal immigrants within 100 miles of the southwest border if daily coverage crossings average 4,000 over 7 days. The bill was rejected by Republicans. I would have to see exactly what these crossings would entail. Would it be people trying to go through the process, or would these people be seeking asylum? I mean, if this is 4,000 crossing legally, then what's the complaint, right?
Automatically kicked in border enforcement.
So
I've been down
don't
to the
you
border,
agree we
okay?
have to
Like
allow-
I went down to the border and let me tell you what I saw at the
Oh.
border and then we can go. Okay, so
Okay.
so
Saw it with your own eyes.
But not just saw with my own eyes. Talked to the border patrol agents. Okay, the way that the Biden administration was treating the border
Mm-hmm.
for the vast majority of their term was to treat a claim of asylum without evidence as evidence that the person ought to be given asylum. And so the first priority was for border patrol to be activated to go to places where Mexican drug cartels were leaving people at the border en masse, and then to process those people and let them into the country within 72 hours. The goal of this for the Mexican drug cartels was to clear large swaths of the border of border patrol agents specifically, so that in those unoccupied areas, fentanyl and drugs could then be passed, human trafficking can then be passed in those unoccupied areas.
So you mentioned these cartels.
So you think? Well, let me allow him to repeat. Let me allow him to repeat this conspiracy.
The majority of their term was to treat a claim of asylum without evidence as evidence that the person ought to be given asylum. And so the first priority was for border patrol to be activated to go to places where Mexican drug cartels were leaving people at the border en masse, and then to process those people and let them into the country within 72 hours. The goal of this for the Mexican drug cartels was to clear.
So
I've been down
don't
to the
you
border,
agree we
okay?
have to
Like I went down to the border and let me tell you what I saw at the
Oh.
border and then we can go. Okay, so
Okay.
so
Saw it with your own eyes.
But not just saw with my own eyes. Talked to the border patrol agents. Okay, the way that the Biden administration was treating the border for the vast.
So he's talked to border patrol agents when he went down to the border, and based off what I don't even know how many people he talked to said This is his conspiracy theory in regards to the border. Let's listen.
Vast majority of their term was to treat a claim of asylum without evidence as evidence that the person ought to be given asylum. And so the first priority.
A claim without evidence? I don't think that's true. I think that's made up. Like, come on. Like, Shapiro, I feel like Shapiro does have common sense, and he really thinks that the United States, Biden's administration, allowed people to claim asylum without evidence. Like, come on.
Priority was for Border Patrol to be activated to go to places where Mexican drug cartels were leaving people at the border en masse, and then to process those people and let them into the country within 72 hours. The goal of this for the Mexican drug cartels was to clear.
And he thinks that the Biden administration willingly brought people in so the drug cartel could bring in guns. Like, what is these conspiracy theories? You think the government wanted to do all these stuff? What is the benefit from America? Oh my goodness, bro. This is what I'm talking about.
Large swaths of the border of Border Patrol agents specifically, so that in those unoccupied areas, fentanyl and drugs could then be passed, human trafficking can then be passed in those unoccupied areas.
So you mentioned these cartels. You agree these cartels are profiting off human trafficking, right?
Of course.
So why don't we open up legal means for these people to come in here? Then they don't have to give the cartels money. They're making more money off human trafficking right now because of our immigration system. It doesn't allow more people, and the Republicans do not have a bill to allow more people to come here legally.
I mean, so your answer to illegal immigration is just magically legalize everyone.
No, it's to open up legal paths so these people don't have to leave their livelihood in these countries.
What? Not legalize everybody, just go through the legal process, and if they are they pass, yes, they can be a legal immigrant. What's wrong with that?
And carry a bag and walk through the jungle with their kids.
By the logic that you're using, we could make murder absolutely not a thing by simply pretending that murder is now legal.
What are you talking
your suggestion about? Your suggestion is that millions of illegal immigrants ought to just become legal immigrants, and then magically this would solve the entire problem.
We have failed these people. We have benefited tremendously off exploiting these people. You and I, we have benefited from these people working hard. They just want to be here and be a part of our country. I can't think of anything more American than that.
I'm not doubting the willingness of people to come to the country. I'm doubting the incentive structure that draws people to the country with rich array of social benefits that didn't exist.
What is that incentive structure?
That incentive structure is things like Medicaid, things like free schooling.
You think someone's going to leave their home in Venezuela to come here and leech off our Medicaid? These people want to work. These people want to live, man.
Okay, then if they sign a contract saying they don't receive social benefits, they're more than welcome to stay.
Oh. Well, sadly, they would take benefits if they were available to them if they could come out of the shadows, and they would actually pay more taxes and contribute more to society. Let me ask you, if there's
passionate hands, no worries.
If there's an accident, and let's say your wife's in an accident, a car accident, the only person that witnessed it is an undocumented immigrant. They're not coming forward to be a witness, Ben. Doesn't that trouble you?
This is the reason that I should allow millions and millions of illegal immigrants into the country. Is on the off chance they might be a witness.
It's one reason that these people are being treated as second-class citizens, even though they benefit you and I.
Can I ask a question? What is your standard for whether someone should be allowed into the country?
My standard?
Yes.
What do you mean my standard? Like as far as their education or their ability?
Yes. You're creating immigration policy. Who should be allowed into the country?
I think we should allow a wide variety of people. This country,
everyone.
Not everybody starts out as a doctor, Ben. Some people start out doing menial tasks.
So everyone. So you have no limits. How about numbers?
No,
do you have any number limit? No numerical limit.
20,000 people die or retire in this country a day. There's only 10,000 births. We need more people.
I agree. That's why we should all have more babies.
So, okay, well, guess what? People aren't going to have them because you're not incentivizing it. Kamala Harris is with her things like $6,000 child tax credit. Meanwhile, you guys are just trying to cause more problems and make it harder for people to raise families.
Okay, as a person with 4 children, I can promise you I have a very, very strong incentive structure in allowing people to have more kids and incentivizing people to have more kids. I wish the government benefits were more effective.
Just wanting people to have more kids. I'm not. Let me chill. I'm
in doing this, they simply have not been in particular areas of Europe. There's a different argument than the illegal immigration argument. When we're talking about illegal immigration, you seem to be making an argument there ought to be no baseline standard for who gets in and no baseline cap for how many people get in.
I'm not saying that. So we can come up with a figure. We can come up with numbers. So I'm not a lawmaker. That's what we elect people to go do and work out those figures. But Republicans are just fighting everything.
I need some standard.
You need me to come up with a number.
No. Okay, a number or a characteristic or some sort.
Some standard. No criminals. A standard. They need to be willing to work in the country and not be a criminal. Simple as that. Work in the country, not be a criminal. That's a pretty good standard, and I'll say so myself.
Sort of standard for who you would let in the country, because right now all I'm hearing is you just want lots of people to come into the country without any standard and any cap on the number.
No, not at all. I want people to come here who want to work, who want to be a part of this country, and we all benefit from that. Do you think you're not benefiting from these undocumented people? Who do you think is going to build the houses that we need with our shortage?
So do you think the people who come into the country should be eligible for all social benefits?
If they're contributing and they're allowed to contribute fully, right now they're not. They're using other people's social security numbers to pay social security tax and Medicare, and they're not able to get those benefits in the long run.
So again, I'm wondering how you're balancing the cost benefit to the American body politic if what you're suggesting is the day one you arrive in the country and now you're eligible for all social benefits.
I'm not saying day one
with
you're
no
eligible
education,
for all social
low wage
benefits.
labor.
Well, we can work all these details out. You're
Certain
fighting over
details,
the
that's the core of the argument.
Really?
over
You're
legal
upset
immigration.
that somebody who comes to this country and works hard and makes your life better and cheaper is going to get Social Security 40 years from now?
No, not Social Security 40 years from now. Medicaid today.
So wouldn't you rather than get
today.
Medicaid and get preventative care than go to the hospital where it costs
I would prefer
you,
that-
the taxpayer, 10 times more money?
My point, as it has been from the beginning, is that you need screening procedures for immigration.
So
This
you're
is how
saying
it's been-
Border Patrol is failing then to screen these people properly? Is that the accusation you're making?
I'm making the case that Border Patrol certainly is failing.
How do you know that? Because you talked to a couple Border Patrol agents? You know,
No, not-
that is so
No, because-
insulting to our Border Patrol who's fighting every day on the front lines.
No,
You
because-
think they're not screening these
no,
people
because-
and they're being bamboozled by some people claiming asylum and tricking them?
No, because literally today, the FBI announced that an Afghan national was let in without vetting and tried to plan a terrorist attack on
One
election day.
guy.
Oh, it's just one. So
One guy.
During the Biden administration, Border Patrol encountered 1,900 individual potential terrorist ties, compared to 1,400 during the Trump administration. So, I mean, all the work they do in countering and dealing with terrorists, all that means nothing. Just one guy comes across, yeah, they failed. See, this is the Republicans. Everything sucks. Everything is horrible. Nothing is good. That's all Republicans nowadays, bro.
You know how many terrorists were caught by the border under Trump?
There are over
Zero.
There are over three.
At least we're catching them.
There are over three. First of all, it's not true because a huge number of people we don't know who they are coming across the border between ports of entry. Second of all, you're talking in this country right now at least 300,000 minors. We have no idea where they are.
Oh, that is nonsense.
That is not nonsense.
No, it is. It is ICE has lost track of them.
Oh, he said he's talking about children now.
Patrol is fighting every day on the front lines.
No,
You
because-
think they're not screening these
no,
people
because-
and they're being bamboozled by some people claiming asylum and tricking them?
No, because literally today, the FBI announced that an Afghan national was let in without vetting and tried to plan a terrorist attack on
One
election
guy.
day. Oh, it's just one. So
One guy. You know how many terrorists were caught by the border under Trump?
There are over
Zero.
There are over three.
At least we're catching them.
There are over three. First of all,
These individuals were listed in the terrorist screening database, which includes blah, 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 and in between. Okay.
First of all,
Here?
it's not true because a huge number of people, we don't know who they are coming across the border between ports of entry. Second of all, you're talking in this country right now at least 300,000 minors. We have no idea where they are.
Oh, that is.
Department of Homeland Security Inspector Central report found that ICE cannot always track the status location of unaccompanied migrant children.
Nonsense.
That is not nonsense.
No, it is. It is ICE has lost track of them because it's voluntary for them to keep in touch with the system. They are not.
Ooh. The IC called the issue urgent, noting that 3,200 children missed immigration court hearings and 291,000 were never served a court notice. The IC also warned that children missed court are at risk for trafficking, exploitation. Okay. All right.
Not lost. They're released to their sponsors who have to go through background checks. You have no idea what you're talking about.
They don't.
You think
all have to-
300,000 minors are lost in America? Are you crazy?
I'm saying that. I'm not saying that. The Department of Justice
Next thing
is
you're going
saying
to tell me there's 19,000 murderers, right? Is that the next talking point?
No, that is not the next talking point.
Okay.
Department of Justice. I mean, from what the fact check said, it said that they're at risk of being exploited, but not that they are being exploited.
But you're going to have to explain to me why it is okay for literally tens of thousands of minors to be checked out to majors, to people who are above majority age, and then for the government to not. When I say lose track, I don't mean minors
checked
walking
out
the
to their
streets by themselves.
sponsor who goes through a background check. Is that what you mean?
They do not go through.
How do you know that?
Because they're not checking in.
How
A
do you
huge
know
number
that?
of people.
Oh, it's voluntary. Why does our law allow for it to be voluntary then if it's not working?
The law should not allow for it to be voluntary.
Oh,
And in fact, in some cases, it is not voluntary.
So-
and in fact, human
okay, so-
trafficking is going on at scale.
It sounds like
Why is
you're
it so
upset
bad?
when the
By way,
problem doesn't exist. What
I
is
have
this
a question.
problem?
Why are you okay with minors who are being checked out to people of majority age who then don't check in with the government? Is that okay with you?
I'm okay with minors being checked out to their sponsors who go through background checks who are usually family members, people that know them. You think it's just some random? You think I can go pick up a undocumented immigrant child right now?
No, but I do know that has happened to tens of thousands of kids. In this
Oh,
country.
really? So
Yes.
you think they're just being released to random people?
They're being released to people who claim that they are relatives, and in many cases, they are not necessarily relatives.
How do
They're
you
not
know that?
because they are not checking in for their follow-up appointments.
Oh, because they're not checking in for the voluntary
So you have-
follow-up appointments. So you're assuming the worst. You're assuming they're probably being kidnapped and trafficked.
I'm happy for you that you're assuming the best as to what happens with minor
I'm
children.
always going to assume the best about my fellow Americans. And of course, if these people are their sponsors and their background checks by these agencies, I'm going to assume the best. Unlike you, that's a weird thing to assume all this weird
No,
stuff.
actually, what's kind of weird to me is that you assume that anybody who picks up a kid without proper verification and background check doesn't check in for months at a time.
Proper verification and background check?
What do you know about the parents? What do you know about the people who are picking them up? What do you know about the cousins? What do you know
I've
about the
read that
uncles?
these people go through background checks and they are
How
sponsors,
solid
usually family members. You don't sound like
Why
you
aren't-
read anything about this. You just have some fantasy you made up about me being able to go pick up an undocumented child. Why don't you and I go try to get one later? We'll see what happens.
I have a question. Where are you possibly coming up with that since I've actually said the opposite?
You want me to name the article? You go Google it yourself. Maybe
Yeah,
you'll
and-
learn something.
Which article specifically are you talking about?
Ben, when you get home, go on Google and type in how are undocumented migrants' children released and what is the process. You'll read all about it.
I can read all about it. And one of the things that I've read is that the immigration services in this country have not done proper follow-up.
Well, you read it on Gateway Pundit? Or
no,
what?
on Wall Street Journal, at the Department of Justice, in all of the legal claims by the federal government. Yes, this is in the New York Times. Okay,
So I just want to make sure we're on the same page. 300,000 children
do
are
not
being
have
exploited in America right now.
That is not the claim.
Okay,
the claim is that the federal government does not know where they are.
Oh,
that is the claim, and that is absolutely valid. Do you know where they are? Do you think the federal government knows where all of them are?
the federal government should be
I have a
tracking
question. I think that the federal government has a responsibility to release children who come across the border only to people for whom there is follow-up available. Yes, and I find it very bizarre that you're totally fine with people signing off on handing over children to people who merely claim to be relatives without any follow-up whatsoever.
Why do you say merely claim? You don't know what that background check is.
Because usually you should have evidence that is in fact the case.
How do you know it's not?
Why is the assumption that it is?
Your claim is that people are taking out kids like library books and not providing the proper identification and background.
Your lack of concern about what happens to those kids when proper verification and follow-up is not done seems
because you guys create fantasy scenarios where things that aren't happening. Are there cases where some children are going to be exploited? Of course, there's tons of people in this country. We're the third largest country in the world.
So what should we stop that?
Well, you sound very passionate about this. Maybe you should write your Congress member and say we should tighten up these laws and make it mandatory instead of voluntary.
In order to do that, one of the things you might want to do, close the border.
The border is closed, Ben.
No, it is certainly not.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
It is certainly not closed.
Do you think the border was closed under Trump?
No, I don't think it was fully closed under Trump.
Oh, so you say Trump failed at closing the border?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Donald Trump should have done more to close the border.
Why would you want him back in there if he's going to fail again?
Because he did a better job than Joe Biden, who let in 6.5 million illegal immigrants.
Joe Biden has the exact same border encounters right now as Trump at the end of his administration.
I have a question.
If Trump was on pace to let in 900,000, if that was the case, a year.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Why is it that after a president allows in, through pure executive order negligence, having
I'm not gonna lie, Shapiro's getting cooked. Oh my goodness, that's tough.
Walk back the executive orders that created the policies that you're now. I mean, if you want to call it purposeful, call it purposeful. They were on day one. They reneged on Remain in Mexico. They changed the standards by which asylum was claimed.
Mexico's got to play. It takes two to tango. Mexico didn't want anything to do with Remain in Mexico.
Remain in Mexico was the American.
The Trump administration launched the Remain in Mexico policy, officially known as the Migrant Protection Protocols, requiring asylum seekers at the southern border to wait in Mexico for their court days.
American policy. It was Joe Biden who walked out on Remain in Mexico.
There's also a small number.
President Biden ended the program upon taking office. The Mexican government opposes reinstating it, and about 84,500 people were impacted by the policy.
It's like a couple tens of thousands of people.
The unprecedented level of illegal immigration is apparently totally fine with you under Joe Biden.
No, listen, we need more people in this country, Ben. There's no legal means for them to come in that are reasonable. So these people are forced to come in through the southern border because there's no other way.
There are hundreds of thousands of people who come into this country every year legally on visas.
Yes, and that process is difficult. We need a lot more people than hundreds of thousands.
So you're making a case for broadening legal immigration, but you are not setting any standard or numbers by which we are supposed to adjudicate whether this is good or bad.
That's not my job. All I know is it's too difficult right now.
So you're not making an argument at all. You're making an argument that basically we should just legalize everybody who wants to come into the country.
Not at all. I'm fine with a number.
You have not set a number. You have not set a standard. You've suggested you're utterly fine with what happens to minors if they are released to adults without proper evidence.
I have not.
You have not suggested.
It went from like if you're having a reasonable conversation, to say that he thinks that there should be no standard is ridiculous, right? Like, be reasonable. Now this guy is definitely coming aggressive at Shapiro. Got a couple of gotchas in there and very what's the word? Sarcastic, backhanded a little bit. Just need to calm down a little bit.
You have suggested that there is no major problem with exploitation of children being trafficked over the border.
I'll go with Trump's number, 1 million a year, because that's what he was on pace to let in by the end of his administration. 75,000 a month equals 900,000.
Thank you.
Yeah, someone
Good for
got
you,
a minute and 40.
Tara, to meet you. So I'm just really unclear about what of her policies do you think are bad? Because I'm not sure I heard that yet.
Okay, the revocation. So I think first we have to define what we think her policies are.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so there is the policy that was implemented under Joe Biden, and then there's the policy that she seems to have adopted over the course of the last 45 to 60 days when she was actually running for president, where she seems to have adopted many of the prior immigration policies of the Trump administration. So which one do you think is actually her position is sort of the open question about Kamala Harris? I'm assuming that the record of the Biden administration provides a pretty good track record as to what she would do with the border where she made president.
I mean, I think what's really clear that I feel like you've overlooked a lot is that a lot of the things that Joe Biden has done that you don't love are because he first tried to do things the right way through legislation. But Congress won't do it. So I guess my question for you is, what would your plan be for Kamala if not to try to get a law through Congress when Congress won't pass them?
I'm perfectly happy for trying to get a law through Congress, provided I, actually like the law. I mean,
yeah, sure.
But if you're talking about what she could do day one, I mean, she could actually continue to enforce the newfound enthusiasm for border security in the run-up to the election that Joe Biden has now implemented.
Well,
so remain in
setting
Mexico,
aside your
revising asylum,
characterization
and all the
of
rest of that.
Setting aside your characterization,
I mean, that's actually what he
how?
did.
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
remain in Mexico.
Which is fraught with rape. Actually, remain in Mexico has been found to be really dangerous for the people who are stuck there.
Okay, and it is also a fact of the matter that if you're talking about controlling the border, remain in Mexico is a better way to control the border than simply releasing people into the interior with a come back to court date.
So you feel that that would be better than, say, funding border security and related agencies to house those people safely?
It is generally not a matter of funding at the border. It really is not.
Then what is it?
It is a matter of how asylum is actually interpreted. So the way that asylum was interpreted for a long time was that you had to show by preponderance of the evidence that you actually had a legitimate asylum claim.
That's not that different now. It's not that different. No.
Yeah.
This claim is over. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. It's getting good though. My next claim is the Israel-Hamas war would not have started under Donald Trump.
It's just like when he gets into his Republican rhetoric, it loses.
So this process has gotten more conciliatory over the course of time.
Okay, so what evidence do you have to support that claim?
Okay, so the latest reports from the New York Times,
Israel-Hamas war would not have started under Donald Trump.
Sinwar suggested that he was essentially counting on Iranian interference and help with the October 7th attacks, and that was incentivized by the fact that Iran was attempting to forestall any sort of deal between Israel and the Saudi government for Saudi to join the Abraham Accords. It was very well known at the time, and I happen to know that the Saudi government was very much ready to join the Abraham Accords if Donald Trump had been reelected. If that had happened, that would have forestalled Hamas action because the incentive to have done what happened on October 7th would largely have been gone at that point.
I mean, of course Ben Shapiro would say this. I don't know if he has anything but the Abraham Accords. Abraham Accords were a treaty between Israel, the United Arab Emirates of Morocco, Bahrain, and Sudan to normalize relations and promote peace and religious understanding among the nations. There are ongoing efforts to normalize relationships between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Hamas war would not have started under Donald Trump. It's good. This process has gotten more conciliatory over the course of time.
Okay, so what evidence do you have to support that claim?
Okay, so the latest reports from the New York Times of internal papers from Yahya Sinwar suggested that he was essentially counting on Iranian interference and help with the October 7th attacks, and that was incentivized by the fact that Iran was attempting to forestall any sort of deal between Israel and the Saudi government for Saudi to join the Abraham Accords. It was very well known at the time, and I happen to know that the Saudi government was very much ready to join the Abraham Accords if Donald Trump had been reelected. If that had happened, that would have forestalled Hamas action because the incentive to have done what happened on October 7th would largely have been gone at that point. The entire purpose of that attack was to prevent the formation of a broader Sunni-Israeli alliance in the Middle East.
Do you think the incentive of October 7th was simply Iranian plot?
I think that the Iranians were certainly interested in facilitating the Hamas attacks, and without Iranian support, it would have been very difficult for Hamas.
I want to ask you, do you think that the conditions in Gaza in any way factor into October 7th?
I mean, I think that the conditions in Gaza certainly factor into support for Hamas. As far as the specific attack of October 7th as opposed to rocket attacks, the distinction between, for example, continuous rocket attacks that have been happening since 2006 when Hamas took over the Gaza Strip and the wide-scale terror assault of October 7th is sort of a difference in kind.
Now, since 2005, what has Israel done to the Gaza Strip to formulate or allow kind of the otherization of the Palestinian people who live in the Gaza Strip?
Well, I mean, in 2006, Hamas took over, promptly killed everybody who's associated with the Palestinian Authority, has never held an election since, and has been running the place with an iron fist.
Now, I want to understand now, with an iron fist, is Hamas the one who is putting forth the land, sea, and air blockade in the Gaza Strip?
The land, sea, and air blockade is specifically because Hamas is in control of the Gaza Strip.
Now, I'm confused because if we expect that the October 7th attacks only happened because Iranian influence in the area, I don't see how 17 years of a land, air, sea blockade will happen if that's not a symptom to allowing people basically pressure cook its way into something like that happen.
Okay, the idea that October 7th was specifically as an incident caused by movement between Hamas and Iran and Hezbollah and coordination between those groups for geopolitical reasons is the claim. If the claim that you're making is that October 7th was sort of an inevitability based on the conditions on the ground in the Gaza Strip, that's not exactly how I think foreign policy works.
No, I'm saying foreign policy works in the sense that you can't ignore the overlying cause of an issue. So now when we talk about the Abraham Accords, do you not think that the Palestinian people not involved in the Abraham Accords plays any part into the region remaining unstable, specifically with these two groups of people?
The region got specifically much more stable while Donald Trump was president because of the Abraham Accords.
With again, I don't know how you can go and quantify that when the Palestinian people are not involved. 2023 was the deadliest year for Palestinian children on October 6th, according to a UN report published on October 6th. Now, if we go and keep ignoring the Palestinian problem, then I don't understand how we can continue to act like forging partnerships between Gulf Arab countries is going to promote stability to the region when we're leaving out 2 million people in Gaza and then 2 million people in the West
I mean, it
Bank.
was promoting a lot more stability in the region. For the Saudis, for the Bahrainis, for the UAE.
And then October 7th still, you're telling me October 7th still happened because of geopolitical reasons in that area. If the Palestinians are not addressed in Abraham Accords, why do you think that there was a need for October 7th to happen?
I mean, the reason October 7th happened was specifically because of the confluence of Palestinian desire to put the issue of Palestinians back on the front pages and an Iranian desire to use that as a wedge issue to destroy the Abraham Accords.
Front pages as opposed to what? As opposed to it being silenced through political plays under Donald Trump to promote these Abraham Accords that, again, don't achieve the root issue of the problem. The Palestinian people cannot be left out of the table when it comes to resolution or an accord dealing with the conflict.
I mean, okay, so the root issue of which problem specifically?
Of the problem. Do you agree with illegal settlements in the West Bank?
With the illegal settlements? I mean, so it is.
Do you consider settlements illegal?
No.
Under international law, it's considered illegal.
That is not true.
I mean, the UN and most international.
There are approximately 520,000 Jews living in settlements in the West Bank, which are legal under Israeli law, but considered illegal under international law.
Foreign bodies have decided that those settlements are legal. Now, do you think that that's just a case of...
I think the UN is trash. But
so that's what I was going to say, is that if the UN is trash, if nobody around this area can be brokered into as a third party, if Israel's not allowing third-party investigators to come to the Gaza Strip and determine what's happening there, who can justify, who can have the moral authority in the region and say that this is what's happening, that this is a reason of this, or that putting them towards the backside of the conflict is this reason? I need to understand from you, what's your prescription for the area, for the Palestinian people? Are you like Ben Gvir, who says that there's three options: willful immigration of the Palestinian people, like live under subjugation as a second-class citizen of Israeli rule, or third, die? What's the option?
No, I mean, moderating and then electing a government that is worthy of actually governing its people and not stealing billions of dollars from its people, either the Palestinian Authority, Islamic Jihad, or Hamas, would be an excellent start.
So I need to understand, do you feel like they have the opportunity to do so when they're under the subjugation of 17 years of a blockade by an occupying power? If for 17 years, since the disengagement of Israeli settlements in the Gaza Strip, Israel was able, by the flick of a switch, to turn off the electricity, water supply, and fuel reserves. Right now, we know that in the north of Gaza, up until today, 2 weeks went by where no humanitarian aid was going in. There is no Rafah border anymore. There is no humanitarian going through there. It's been demolished.
Okay.
And then in the other,
it's not true that humanitarian aid is not going in. Actually, just a couple of days ago,
just a couple of days ago, because since October 1st, there was no aid going to the northern part of Gaza.
Because there are ongoing anti-terror operations in the north of Gaza.
So does that mean that the civilians who are in the northern Gaza are not subject to humanitarian aid because there's a military action by an occupying force?
It means that there's no actual excellent way of distributing that aid. This has been a major problem with the humanitarian aid throughout. The last time they sent 100 trucks, this is what I was going to mention, they sent 100 trucks of humanitarian aid in just a couple of days ago.
Before October 7th, 500 trucks were needed to sustain life in Gaza. 100 trucks were supposed to say
at least half of the aid is being stolen by Hamas and then resold at higher prices.
I need you to understand that almost every international humanitarian rights group says that this humanitarian crisis is man-made. It is man-made.
I agree that it's man-made.
And I know who you think the man is.
Yes.
I'm telling you, there's only...
It's not Hamas. Wait, does Hamas have any agency here at all?
I'm telling you that right now, if
does
you
the
want
Palestinians have any agency here at all?
The Palestinians absolutely have agency, but again, with an occupying force, what does that agency limit to? If a Gaza fisherman can't go 6 miles past the nautical line that Israel has arbitrarily placed, what agency is there?
Why do you think that Israel placed that line?
Again, that's what I'm telling you, is that how
just
do you
for fun or what? Do you think Israel wants soldiers in the Gaza Strip?
Again, here's the thing. I know that high-level cabinet members in the Israeli government right now is saying that we're going to resettle in Gaza. That this is the plan. That we're not going to
position in the Israeli
now,
government.
Do you agree with that position?
No, with the resettlement of the Gaza Strip, no.
Okay, so you want the Gaza Strip to remain Palestinian land?
I'm perfectly happy for it not to remain Israeli land, but that doesn't mean that it can be governed by the current entities that the Palestinians are choosing to govern themselves. The last entity they did, Israel pulled down in 2005. A terrorist group now ruled the region and then promptly used it to build kilometers.
You know what I respect very much more so than who's the last person that came up? Charlie Kirk. Because Ben Shapiro still has my respect, is that he's willing to converse. His tone doesn't get higher. He's not snarky. He doesn't even try to talk over anybody. He's very calm. So that is Shapiro is a good guy, man. I'm just saying, Shapiro is a good guy.
Kilometers of terror tunnels that outsize the London subway network.
I want you to understand, Ben, that there is no way for any type of democratic institution or process to happen in the Gaza Strip when there's an occupying force who will go and subvert it. If you have Israeli parliament,
so they don't have agency.
If you have, it's hard to when there's an occupying force.
Believe it or not, it actually is not that hard not to vote for terrorists.
It
is not.
It's not. It's 100% impossible for you to go and make that distinction when there is no alternative. Right now,
that is not true. There's not an alternative.
No, there is no alternative to life under no occupation for the Gaza Strip. Again, I'm asking you simply, is that right now, if you have Israeli parliament members, Knesset members, who are saying that we plan on resettling Gaza, that this is not
a government position.
No, again, these are people who can fracture the government of Israel.
You know, it is a government position. The government of Hamas that is currently holding 100 hostages, including babies. This war would be over today.
And the hostages should be released, and no civilians should be involved in the conflict.
Should Hamas surrender?
So I want to ask you.
Surrender?
I think that there should be no civilians involved in this.
Should Hamas surrender?
Surrender to who?
To the Israeli government.
Will the Israeli government stop bombarding civilians if that is?
Because if Hamas surrenders, yes.
Because right now we saw them march from the north to the south of Gaza, and they said that the whole goal of this war was to what? Was to return the hostages, correct?
I mean, there was a dual goal. One was to destroy Hamas, and the other was to return the hostages.
See, that's the thing. When I come to the table to argue with someone, I want to assume that there's good faith, not that there's a dual goal or dual ambitions in the process.
Of course there's a dual goal. If there were no hostages, the singular goal would be the destruction of Hamas.
Okay, now understand this. Netanyahu will continue to project this war because he's facing crime and bribery charges. So there's no, again, I need to understand, Ben, if there
was a full-on unity government in Israel, including his opposition until a couple of months ago.
And so his unity government will not let him end this war, accept the ceasefire
Unity
deal because
government
they can
included people
fracture the
like-
government? Yes or no?
No,
Can Ben Gvir, if he decides to call for snap elections, can him and Smotrich not decide that this is what we want to do, and Benjamin Netanyahu is immediately supposed
I promise
to
you,
run for prime minister?
If there were snap elections today, Netanyahu first of all is leading in the polls. But even if you were not leading in the polls, Benny Gantz, Gadi Eisenkot, Naftali Bennett, people who are actually running the election against Bibi Netanyahu, would be pursuing extremely similar policies in the Gaza Strip simply because Israel cannot allow Hamas to continue to govern the Gaza Strip.
Awesome. So then the hostages are placed second to this. So this isn't about there can't be two dual goals.
Of course there can.
How?
Why could there not be two
Because
dual
one of
goals?
these goals is completely antithetical to returning to the last one.
What? How?
Because when
in fact, they are deeply connected. If Hamas does not surrender, how are the hostages getting back?
Again, I'm saying because every operation that dealt with returning the hostages involved the death of arguably more civilians and more hostages in the area. Yep.
Good to meet you.
Hey, Ben, nice to meet you. So just returning to the prompt that the war in Gaza wouldn't have started if Trump were president.
Yes.
The reason that I disagree with that so vehemently is just looking at history. I don't think that the bombing of the Beirut embassy would have happened if Jimmy Carter had won in 1980. I don't think that Nixon is responsible for the Six-Day War. I don't think, for the Yom Kippur War. I don't think that if Dewey had defeated Truman, that Israel wouldn't be independent. Israel is a sovereign state. They make their own decisions based on their own security issues. We're both Jewish men. I think we can both say that Jews are very independent and that we don't need to be told what the U.S. government wants to be able to make our own decisions. So for all those reasons, again, just looking at the history of the region and how all these other wars developed because of situations on the ground, I just think that it's unfair to say that either political party in the United States is responsible for the war-making policy of the Israeli government, whoever is in charge.
Okay, but we're not discussing the war-making policy, which was a response to October 7th. The claim was really whether October 7th would have been launched by Hamas, knowing that Israel has complete military superiority over Hamas, which Hamas must have known. Why that gets launched on October 7th, why that didn't happen, for example, under Donald Trump or any time in the intervening 17 years from when Hamas took over the Gaza Strip. And the rationale that I'm suggesting is that basically the Biden administration came in, they decided to take an antithetical view to the Saudi government, not just the Israeli government. They came in, they were very unfriendly to Saudi Arabia, for example, delisting the Houthis as a terrorist group. They started to draw closer to the Iranians in an attempt to pursue a revision of the JCPOA. They attempted to draw distance between themselves and the Israeli government. Hamas saw this, Hamas and Iran saw this, and they decided the best way to put pressure on the Abraham Accords more generally and to forestall any prospective peace deal between the Saudis and the Israelis would be to launch the attack right now.
See, and what I would argue is what was much more relevant to the launching of the attack on October 7th was Yahya Sinwar being released by the Israeli government in exchange for the name of the soldier is escaping me. Gilad Shalit. Thank you.
That happened 10 years ago. I mean, that was 2 decades.
I know, and I think you would acknowledge that the sophistication of this plan would have taken years. I don't think it was planned in relation to anything the U.S. government was doing. Again, I point to all of these other attacks and wars that happened over the year that had nothing to do with who was in power in the White House. It had to do with specific situations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And I just don't think it's helpful for us to pretend that the U.S. is the determining factor in this war. I think you would agree.
Well, the reason it's helpful, I think, is because when it comes to foreign policy, this goes to sort of a root issue about foreign policy that's rather interesting to discuss, and that is the belief that when the United States draws away from American allies, when the United States draws significant distance with American allies, particularly in regions of
drawing away from American allies. That's Trump that did that. He's the one that says NATO's a bad idea and us being allies and having an internationalist foreign policy is a bad thing.
To be fair, the actual policy of President Trump, which was to actually increase the amount of funding from each NATO nation into NATO.
No, that was Obama.
No.
NATO guideline states member countries should spend 2% of their GDP on defense. From 2016 to 2020, NATO countries increased overall defense spending by $50 billion, partly due to Trump's urging and partly in response to Russia's annexation of Crimea and rising security concerns in Europe.
No,
that was Obama in 2014.
It was. They increased the amount of defense
Trump ran
spending under
on
NATO.
issue.
Yes, and that was what.
But Obama's the one where the policy was actually implemented.
Well, no, the policy was also
about the 2% goal.
The increase happened.
And
under
on top
President
of that, NATO expanded under Biden. So
NATO expanded under Biden as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It didn't expand under Biden preemptive to the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
No, I'm not arguing that. But I'm saying if the question is who has been more dedicated to our system of alliances overseas, it's clearly the Democratic Party.
I mean, that is clearly not true. If you're talking about what has effectually made American allies stronger, the answer would not be the policies of the Biden administration. I mean, if we want to talk Ukraine, we can. We can talk about the slow walking of aid to Ukraine throughout the Ukraine war. I'm a big advocate of the idea that the United States actually should have pursued a policy of rushing more aid into Ukraine and then pursuing an off-ramp as soon as possible, sort of Henry Kissinger suggested policy early on in the war. But if you're talking about...
So then we would agree that it's a mistake for Republican congressional officials in Congress to cut aid to Ukraine. Okay.
Yes. When it comes to the Israel-Gaza war, the Israel-Hamas war, which is what this led off with, again, my contention is that the timing was driven specifically by a desperate hope by Hamas and Iran to break the burgeoning Saudi-Israeli and Sunni-Israeli alliance that was happening in the Middle East, and the best way they could see to do that was to launch an attack to bring up the issue that had largely been sidelined by the Abraham Accords, because it turns out that a great way to make a deal between countries that disagree on issue A is to make a deal on issues B,
but
C,
that
and D.
presumes that the Sunni American alliance against the Shia Iranian-backed alliance only started under Trump, and that's just clearly not true. We've been aligned with Sunni-led governments for at least the last 50 years.
The realignment of the Middle East under
the
President
alliance with
Obama.
Saudi Arabia goes back to World War II.
I mean, of course, that's true. It's also true that Barack Obama's distancing from Saudi Arabia in favor of, for example, the JCPOA, which Saudi opposed, so did the Israelis, so the Bahraini, so did all the countries of the Abraham Accords. And then the return to that ideology under Joe Biden exacerbated potential conflict in the Middle East.
This is an interesting conversation, but I don't think either way can be proved. This is just empty rhetoric that you really can't prove either way because so many circumstances play into such a violent attack to happen in the first place. So I'm gonna kind of just move on. I'm not saying Shapiro is doing bad or anything. It's just this is not provable. But let's move on to this last one.
Commit to a peaceful transfer of power. Okay, so yeah, I think it's simple. I think Trump helped facilitate a fake electorate scheme to override the election in 2020, to have Mike Pence not certify the election, and then allowed violence to happen at the Capitol. So Donald Trump gave a speech for an hour and a half where he would say things like, fight like hell, they're stealing the country away from us. And then when people got to the Capitol, Donald Trump sat there for 3 hours and watched them. When his aides, his family, and everyone was telling him, put a stop to the violence, call them, tell them to go home. He did not. And I think that is an example of Trump not committing to the peaceful transfer of power. He was allowing the violence to happen when he could have stopped it.
Okay, so as far as allowing the violence to happen when he could have stopped it, I'm wondering exactly what he could have done given the fact that the Capitol Police were activated, in fact, pretty quickly in the middle of that debacle. As far as not committing to the peaceful transfer of power, do we mean verbally or in action? So I agree with you verbally. He never suggested that I'm going to leave.
He could have said something earlier. He could have sent the National Guard. Like, what the fuck? Shapiro, like that.
And then he did. So, so I'm not sure actually how much we disagree on this matter. I thought that January 6th was terrible. I thought that his behavior between the election of November 2020 and January 6th was bad. There may be disagreement on the extent to which we believe incitement took place as opposed to bad behavior that raised the temperature that I think was really, really negative. As far as not committing to the peaceful transfer of power, he clearly committed to the extent that he left, right? I mean, Joe Biden has been president for the last 3.5 years, for how much of that he's been mentally aware. But, I'm just wondering what sort of where do we disagree?
Yeah, well, I'll quote you, right? January 6th was the worst thing to happen since 9/11, right? And I just want to be clear that you agree he verbally did not want to commit to the peaceful transfer of power. He tried to stop it, yet you are still saying that he should be the president of the United States.
Well, I mean, he did
right? That is your claim, though. He should be the president of the United States, and you agree he verbally did not commit to the peaceful transfer of power.
Well, I mean, he did not verbally suggest that there ought to be a violent uprising, revolution, or military
But
coup.
he also didn't stop it, right? So there were people inside the Capitol, and he sat for 3 hours. His closest aides
he should have spoken earlier. I agree.
Yes, and they were telling him, like, Trump, you have to do this. You have to stop. He was informed at 2:14 p.m. that they were outside the Capitol saying, hang Mike Pence. Hang Mike Pence. His aides went up to him and said, they are saying this. You need to stop something. What does he do? At like 2:24 p.m., he says, Mike Pence is a traitor. Right? That was his tweet. Why do you think he would tweet that when he knew the violence was going on? They were saying, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence had to go into hiding. Why do you think he would tweet that at that moment?
I mean, I disagree with him tweeting with that.
I'm not saying you agree with that.
So the question as to why Donald Trump does anything is a matter of public speculation.
You're a smart guy. I'm asking for your speculation.
I mean, I don't. If your question to me is whether I think that Donald Trump wanted Mike Pence murdered, I think the answer is no.
I'm not asking if he wanted him murdered. I'm saying, do you think he wanted the violence to stop?
Do I think he wanted? Yes.
Really? So his idea to stop the violence was say Mike Pence is a traitor.
I think that he was in control of the forces that he was in control of, and the Capitol Police weren't in control of Nancy Pelosi.
What was he? He was the president of the United States.
Right, and the military
and
was
instead of saying, hey, get out, he said, no, Mike Pence, you're a traitor. Okay. Why do you think he would say that at that moment?
Okay, I just expressed to you that I can't see into his head because I have a hard time.
But you can make a guess, though, right?
Can I ask you why you think he did that?
Why do you
you said that he didn't want to be hanged. He didn't want to be hanged, right?
Yes.
You said that.
Yeah,
so
I don't think he wanted to be hanged. I think that Donald Trump was indifferent to what happened insofar the violence of Mike Pence. I think he wanted a lot of chaos. He wanted violence to delay the certification of the vote, which he was successful with, in hopes that there would be confusion and someone else might step up like another senator so they could allow to put forward the fake electorates. Because that was the plan. That was in Greensboro's plan to do that, and that was the whole idea. So yes, Donald Trump was okay with the violence because he did not want the certification to happen. And in fact, for the first time in American history, he delayed it. And to me, it's like, Ben, I really like you, but I think there's a lot of attributes that I like about you, especially your American values. That is the antithesis of American values. Allowing that to happen, wanting that to happen, and then, yeah.
Okay, so I think that Donald Trump obviously should have done more. I agree with you. He should have done more on January 6th. I think that, he shouldn't have tweeted that about Mike Pence. I disagreed with what he was saying about Mike Pence's and the entire electoral scheme between November and January. As far as not committing to the peaceful transfer of power, again, what I will say is that the legal transfer of power did in fact take place. He did not, in fact, initiate a militia to storm the Capitol of the United States.
Trump's will.
Okay, but
I agree. It happened because of the guardrails of democracy, but Donald Trump did not want it to stand.
Okay.
Do you agree that Donald Trump did not want that election to be certified?
I mean, sure.
So he did not want the peaceful transfer of power then?
I mean, if the election had not been certified, then there still would have been a legal process that took place, right? I mean, the question as to... Hold on, can I ask the opposite for just a second? So is your contention that Donald Trump actually would have been in favor of, for example, like a military coup to keep himself in power?
I think Donald Trump absolutely would have. And all evidence points that he was trying to find any way he could stay in power. Okay. He was. And this is gone
I think he was trying to find. I think he was trying to find any way to say that he didn't lose. I don't think that he was trying to activate any way that he could stay in power. That's not quite the same thing.
No, him saying that he wasn't trying to lose is different from him sending down fake electorates with fake signatures to fraudulently steal the election.
Okay, in order for there to be an insurrection, for example, you'd have to activate the military.
I didn't say an insurrection.
Okay, so again,
all I'm saying is all of Donald Trump's behavior has suggested he did not commit to the peaceful. He did not want the peaceful.
If you're asking me to defend his behavior on January 6th, you'll notice that I really haven't.
Yeah,
so
but
I'm
I feel like
exactly
you're underplaying of how horrible this was.
I mean,
and that's the issue.
Which part? Are you talking about the riots? Are you talking about the behavior?
I'm talking about the fake electorate scheme and the idea that and allowing the violence for 3 hours to happen in the Capitol when they were under.
I mean, Shapiro's getting cooked. There's really not much else I can do. I'm gonna end it here because there's really not much else I'm gonna gain from this. But with that said, very interesting video. Let me know your thoughts, of course. Shapiro, some people he debated like they were just cringe lefties, but the others, they gave Shapiro a run for his money. So I hope you guys enjoyed. You have a good one. Take care.